Thank you all for joining in this morning or evening, whatever time zone this finds you in. It's a privilege to be here and a privilege to be a part of such a bold experiment, to collect the world around embodiment. The guts of spiritual leadership is where we want to dive into today. And our aim is to give you an embodied exploration of what the heck I'm talking about, spiritual leadership. What's that? You'll see that it really centers in something that comes out of my Aikido background. That's where I first learned about this Japanese word called hara, H-A-R-A, hara. And it doesn't have a really good English translation. It really doesn't have a good anatomical translation. It's sort of a physical, psychological, spiritual center of the human being located in the lower abdomen. And what I hope that you have an experience of in our time together today is how to cultivate this center and how this center cultivates spiritual leadership. So that's our aim, how to cultivate this center and how this Hara center cultivates spiritual leadership. So let's start with a couple definitions. What do I mean by leadership? I'm not talking about this or that position in an organization, but really that inside out gesture that is what Kevin Cashman would call authentic self-expression that creates value. Authentic self-expression that creates value. So what then do we mean by spiritual leadership? And that, or Zen leadership, what is that quality that takes leadership to another level that we might call spiritual or Zen-like? And it has to do with which self is being expressed. Is it an ego-based self that is concerned with its own needs and fears and its stuff? Or is it a selfless self, a whole self, a non-dual self, a true self? There's a lot of different words given to it, but it's something coming through us in service of others. So Zen takes aim at the ego self in terms of unwinding its fears and all that keeps leadership small and opening us up into an expression of what we might call the authentic self. And what do you think the gateway to this is? Well, it's the very theme of this conference. It's working with the mind, body as one. This sense of how to work through what seems like a duality or a separation between mind and body is actually a gateway to working through separation and its illusion generally. And so this becomes kind of a stepping stone to how we can work through the seeming separation of self and other, or the other dualities that we struggle with, even life and death, which is the basis for the fears and anxieties that make us, get tense and small. So the other theme that runs through spiritual leadership, and in this talk that we'll be referring to a lot, you'll hear me talk a good deal about energy and the energy that flows through us, not just from us, and how we can point that energy toward the purposes and goals and visions that we want to realize, that we want to bring into this world through ourselves. And just to think about energy in very concrete terms, what I'd like to do is share my screen with you for a moment and take us into an exploration of energy, first in a kind of personal way. What do we mean by energy? Sometimes that word is thrown around and we may not be clear about what we're talking about. So let me be really clear. If it's not solid and it's not liquid and it's not gas and we're talking about it, it's some form of energy. Energy is, in a sense, what leadership is about, is turning the energy of ideas and imagination and vision into things that matter, things that start to come into people's lives and make a difference here on earth. You think about what leadership concerns itself with, it's all energy. What is executive presence? It's a form of energy. Or the feeling of a relationship, dialogue, when dialogue becomes magical, that's a kind of energy. when the vibe of a team that's really cooking and doing great work, that's energy. Or organizational culture, energy. Creativity, energy. Imagination, future vision, energy. So, you know, Peter Drucker observed that leaders are always, you know, first managing their own energy, then orchestrating the energy around us. And what I've come to appreciate about Hara is it not only builds energy so that we can have more 16 days than not, but it also directs energy. It helps us send energy in the directions that matter most. So what do I mean by that? What do I mean by that? The other word you'll hear me use a lot is power. And power and energy are close cousins. In physics, they're defined this way. Power is energy that moves something in time. It's very simple. When you have a lot of energy, you can have more power. You can make more stuff happen as a human being, as a leader, whatever. And Hara is your power plant. This area in the lower abdomen is a place of not only cultivating energy, but also being able to channel it, be able to send it into things that have an effect. So you see this little picture here of a Zen leader book. A lot of the flips and ahas and connections that we'll go through in this session are described in more depth in that book in terms of a journey of leadership that goes from sort of ego-based leadership to whole leadership for the whole picture. And on top of that, you see this little belt, which we call a Hara belt. And I am actually wearing one right now. And I also ask you to have a belt handy somewhat, but for a little different purpose, as an exercise we'll be working on a little later. What I'd like to do now is maybe shift back and just take a look at how we can start to cultivate energy in this center. Let's see how we can find this Hara and start to cultivate it, start to work with it. So for this, I'm going to stand up and move back just a little bit. And what I'd like you notice, I'm wearing a belt here. Let me just tilt this down ever so slightly so you can see. I'm wearing a belt here we call a Hara belt, and it's centered in this lower abdomen area. And first, what I'd like to do is just take my hands and press them together. I invite you to do this as well, whether you're sitting or standing. First, I'd like you to just press your hands together. Press your hands and notice you feel some activation in the lower abdomen, right at the pelvic floor. Something is firing. Notice if you pull your hands apart, even though it engages very different muscles, still something in the base of the abdomen fires. This is the base of the Hara. The pelvic floor is the base of the Hara, so it's right at the bottom of the body, of the torso. Now, another way we can start to experience this is sort of isometrically. And what I'd like you to do for this is to be able to let out a really long, slow exhale. And then it's super exaggerated. So I'm going to ask you to actually isometrically tense the whole front of your body and pull your belly button toward your spine. So you're getting out every last bit of air like you're squeezing toothpaste out of the tube. And then I'm going to give you a countdown, 3, 2, 1, and all at once, release, relax. And see if in that huge relaxation, you can't feel how big and expanded this lower abdomen can get. So we'll do this a couple times just to give you a feel for how you can find Hara. So are you ready? You should be standing up for this. Shake out some of the superficial tension, and let's do a super exaggerated exhale where we're going to tense the front of the body and squeeze out every last drip of air. You ready? Let's go. Exhale. So you're breathing out through the mouth. And as it gets out, you're going to squeeze your hands, pull your belly button toward your spine, squeeze out that last bit. That last bit, 3, 2, 1. Release. Release, relax. And just let the breath settle normally. Just take a couple of normal, regular breaths. And let's try it one more time. And again, you want to almost create like a vacuum down there and then see how big and expansive it can become as you completely relax all at once. So deep, long, extreme exhale. And then making fists, tensing the body, belly button to spine, squeeze out the last bit of air. 3, 2, 1. And just place your hands here in the lower abdomen. Just place your hands here. And just let this area expand fully. And now we just want to invite the breath to come into the area. So for this, make just a micro bend in your knees and let the weight come to the big toe part of the foot. So you can extend the big toe into the earth ever so slightly. Let your eyes come 180 degrees. Micro bend, big toe, eyes 180 degrees. And let's just breathe as if we could send that exhale down through the hara, right down through the base of the pelvic floor, right down through our own center. So this time we're just going to breathe in and out through the nose. So breathing in, and now big toes into the earth, exhale down. Let's try that again. Breathing in, big toes into the earth, and exhale down. Nice and slow. Once more. And make the exhale long and slow, as if it could go right down through your own hara center, right through your big toes, right into the earth. Good. And now let's add one other kind of breathing move to this, where we also feel the bigness and expansiveness. So let's do the up, down, center one more time. Big toes into the earth, settle down. Hands drifting overhead now. And from here, connect into the earth, big toes, and feel an expansion. So peripheral view sees your hands, but the centeredness is still there. Good. First one. Up, down, center. Second one. Set, meaning big toes into the earth, micro bend in the knees, expand. Let's do it one more time. Up, down, center. And overhead. Big. Big feeling. And just stand for a moment and check out your condition of centeredness or stability or what it is, whatever it is for you. We'll each have our own experience. A few things of how this hara development, cultivating breath in this center, actually supports leadership. I'll give you 5 things that it does, although it does many more than 5 in the space of our time together today. Let's go over what I'll call the big 5. And if you like, even as you hear me talk, feel free to keep breathing this way. Even as you sit, you can keep sending each exhale down in a most relaxed, gravitational way. You can still feel your feet on the earth. and you can still feel the big toes connecting into the earth. So you don't have to give that up, even as you listen to me talk about 5 ways that this supports leadership. This kind of deep centered breathing, gravitational breathing down through the hara reduces anxiety. It reduces anxiety in terms of settling our energy down physically in the body. I don't know if you've noticed, but when we get anxious or upset or uptight, it's in our language, things rise up. And this downward sense of letting gravity work is not only relaxing the body and taking tension out, but settling things down physically, that the mind can come clear. So it's reducing anxiety. The second thing it's doing is the more deeply and slowly we can breathe into the lower abdomen, the more we can drop our frequency into a slower, lower level. Each breath is moving the lungs from underneath. I mean, the lungs are up in this area, and when they are moved by muscles down here, every breath completely clears the lungs and allows the breath to come slow, deep, and long. And in that process of lowering our frequency, it lowers the rate of thought. It cuts discursive thinking. There's also connections, and these are just now being understood better and better through our growing understanding of the neuroscience and the fact that the gut is also home to 1 billion nerve cells. You know, we used to think that all those nerve cells were in the brain or down the spinal column, but we're now realizing there's 1 billion of them in what's called the enteric nervous system. And that 9 times as much communication goes from the gut up to the brain as the other way around. So the gut is also something that can say no to the brain. It has a kind of executive function. We think of all the executive function as being frontal cortical kind of stuff, but this is a very primitive no that comes out of our gut level knowing. And that gut level knowing can send a very clear signal to the brain that cuts discursive thinking and settles down the rate of thought. The third thing it does, as we have alluded to already, is it builds energy. It builds energy by bringing the breath down. It's tuning the body as a physical embodied element. And it's building physical energy in the body. That's why I don't know whether you experienced it or talked about it in your breakout groups, but I always find when I breathe this way that I get physically warmer. That's one of the signs of energy flowing. As tension comes out of the body, the energy naturally moves. And of course, the whole Eastern methods of healing build on this idea of how to get energy flow, or conversely, that we get sick in places where energy doesn't flow, where there's constriction or breaks in the energy flow. So building energy is part of what helps where the hara becomes that, in a sense, our power plant. The fourth thing it does is it doesn't just hold on to that energy, it sends it up through our spine. It sends it up through our spine. So what's been, and it's interesting that every system, whether it's Eastern or Western, that has looked at this question of what's going on between breath and body and spine and base, has some theory or some way of describing a very important alchemy that we are capable of through how we breathe. A change that we're able to create through how we tune the body. And it goes something like this. In the Eastern sense, they talk about sushumna or energy spine, or somehow the kundalini in the base that can come up through the top of the head and through the chakra system. The Taoists will talk about it as bringing the fire of the solar plexus underneath the water of the belly, and then you get energy to rise. So there's a whole alchemy around bringing fire underwater, and the ki or the chi flows from that. In the West, we have an increasing understanding of how regular breathing, even any kind of breathing, creates a very subtle movement in the cerebral spinal fluid, which is a charged current that runs up the spine. There's electrical charge in the fluid itself, so it's going to create a current up the spine. It changes our magnetic field. So when we have a clear flow of energy, we have a much bigger field. These are all measurable quantities now. Now, when you set the hara and you're really creating much more movement in the lower abdomen, it's almost like a super pump, a supercharge in what it's creating in the body. So it's going to stimulate more energy flow, more of this flow up the spine. And then to just trace the connection a bit further, what's it stimulating as it gets up into the head, or at the top of the head? In the Eastern system, we talk of it in terms of chakras or energy centers. In the Western system, there's been good search of how it can stimulate the pineal gland in a new way. A pineal gland itself deep in the brain has been implicated as being something of an energy transducer with little crystals in it that can actually vibrate to high frequencies and kick out neuropeptides and neurotransmitter that turns into chemicals in the blood system that regulate gene expression, that regulate behavior and action. This whole cycle or chain of events from energy into matter is getting better understood from even a Western perspective. Where this becomes an interesting phenomenon, and this is something Joe Dispenza writes about a lot, is it starts to cross over into what you might call spiritual leadership, a spiritual dimension, because it can transduce very high frequency signals. And where's it picking up that energy? Well, right now, you and I are awash in all kinds of energies that are around. Energies that we can sense, visually we call light, or audibly we call sound, but there's a ton of energy that we don't have specific, obvious 5 senses for, and yet we can still sense. And some of that sensing, as I mentioned, is happening through the pineal gland. So as it is picking up frequencies, we're able to transduce signals that we pick up in our environment into actions or they transduce it into actions that manifest in our physical body. Now, what kind of antenna are we building? What signals are we picking up? That has to do with how we're tuning ourselves and how we are sensitive to what's going on. Once we're picking it up, how easily it's flowing through our body versus getting stuck. And that gets to the 5th and final point I want to say around how the hara really supports what I call spiritual leadership. And that is, it's the gateway to what in meditation we call samadhi, where the sense of a separate self disappears, just a sense of blending beingness, of being, I want to say one withness, but that still sounds like there's a self who's one with something. There's no self. There's just a illusory sense of separation falls away. A sense of that some people might experience in a flow state when they're in the flow of something and suddenly it's just everything's happening. It's just going and time stands still or goes endlessly. It doesn't even matter. There's just something, whatever, going on that we are a part of in the flow. That condition gives rise to what we call the wisdom of connectedness. The wisdom of connectedness, a kind of knowingness that comes from being part of one thing. A part of, not apart from. Gives rise to a wisdom of connectedness that can inform what strikes us in imagination, or the ideas that become our purpose, our vision, our goals. Why did I think that and not this? Where did that idea come from? Where did creativity come from? The more we operate as a energy transducing conduit for the energies that are around us, the more what we're doing is in tune with that. And that's where leadership starts coming through us, not just from us.